So I'm Gayle Mack. Yes?
Kind of speak loudly,
Speak louder?
because
Okay.
some of us have little hearing issues.
Okay, so if I get quiet, then just kind of do this, and that's my signal. It works even when I'm channeling, so that's, I've programmed, like we were programming our pendulums today. I programmed my guides that if they see somebody do this, they have to speak up. So please do that for me. So I'm Gayle Mack, and I have been open in a channel since I was wee little. I started sharing guidance with people when I was 3, and words would come out of my mouth and conversations greater than my years, and my mom would bring her neighborhood or her work ladies home for lunch, and she would sit me at the end of the table, and they would ask me questions, and I would give them answers, just blow their minds, and it was just fun. I was doing that at age 6, and I was doing hands-on healing as far as I can remember. And I said earlier during our class, when I was little, I was watching The 9 Lives of Thomasina. That's a movie, I think Disney puts it on. And there's the woman that's in the meadow that is the natural healer, and then she takes Thomasina and she brings them, heals them. And I said to my grandma, that's what I'm going to be when I grow up. And she patted my hand and she said, you already are. Oh. So I was really lucky that my grandparents were very schooled. I come from a long line of Hungarian gypsies that were mediums and hands-on healers and herbal healers, and they really, their whole family and their lineage was very gifted. My grandfather's grandmother was the healer to the royals, so she traveled all over Europe, in Budapest and Europe, to take care of the royal families. And my grandmother's grandmother and her mother were the doctors in the area before, back when they just had a doctor come to town once a month. And then they were, her lineage, her parents, grandparents, were the healers. So I come by it naturally. And when I was in my teenage years, I was, because I was so different and odd and I knew things, and people, I would answer them before they asked the question, and it freaked people out. I tried to close it down so I could just be normal, and Divine said, no, we didn't keep you open for nothing. So I had to learn to adjust, and through people who were more wise than I was in my years, I would go to people and they would school me on how to balance my gifts and not be so wide open that I heard everybody's conversations. Because in a large room it was very tough because all their thoughts were bombarding. And so I was able to bring things down to what was necessary for me to know, and if Divine gave it to me, then I shared it. So in my later years, I became a hairdresser, and then people knew that I was also a channel, so they'd say, well, while you're cutting my hair, can you give me a reading? And it's like, I don't know who's coming through, and I don't know if they went to cosmetology school, so no. So then while I was cutting hair, people kept asking me about health, and that was also my upbringing from my grandmother and my studies of herbs. And I helped this doctor with an issue, and she said, you're in the wrong business. And she came back a week later and she said, I talked to this doctor, and they're waiting for your call, and I started naturopathic school the next week. And then I moved my way as my naturopathic business grew. Then I slowed down in the hair till I made the transition. But all through that, I was always sharing Divine. So that's who I am, and the multi-hats. My topic and presentation today is on the spiral breath. And the spiral breath Divine gave me when I had a head injury. And I knew I was in a lot of pain, but I had a photographic memory, perfect recall. If I heard it, saw it, wrote it, it was locked in, and it didn't matter whether it was 20 years before. I could recite something. If I read it, I could tell you what page, what paragraph, how many sentences in, and in a blink of an eye, it was gone. And I couldn't spell my name for 3 weeks. I couldn't remember 2 sentences back to back. And it was really frustrating, because even though I was in a lot of pain, having my mind gone the way I had always known it was the most frustrating. And I went to my doctor and I said, "What's wrong with me? I'm like illiterate, and I'm not illiterate." And he said, "Honey, you had a head injury, a brain injury. You're healing much faster than most people would heal. So give yourself a break and just let it come back." So I went home and I sat down and I prayed, because I'm always in that connection with divine. And I said, "Okay, God, I refuse to be a victim of circumstances. I want to have something to bring me back. Show me what I can do to bring me back to better than I was before the incident." And then I saw this emerald green spiral just floating in the air in front of me. And I could physically see it with my eyes, and even to the point of putting my hands through it, and the light would kind of move like smoke and then reassemble into that spiral. And then I heard to breathe it in. So I started to breathe in the breath, and the green went into my heart. So as I breathed, the emerald green came into my heart. It went to my brain stem, to the occipital, to my crown chakra, into my third eye. It came around into my nostrils and back up into my limbic system. It filled the limbic system, and as I exhaled, it became a golden color, and then it blended with mother of pearl that was all around me. And then it came back into my heart as emerald green. So divine guided me to keep breathing, and there was, from the accident, I had tremendous pressure, and nobody could get the pressure out of my head. And it took me, and being sensitive, the strongest thing I was taking was Excedrin. So for me to take 3 Excedrin was pretty intense, because I did essential oils and did very natural. And then I had to slow the Excedrin down because he was eating a hole in my stomach. So this pressure was just so intense, and as I'm breathing, the pressure is getting more intense. And it's like, God, I asked for you to lessen this. Trust, breathe. So I kept on breathing. It got so intense, and about 15 minutes into the breath, as I exhaled, and my third eye and my amygdalas, they started to vibrate here in my forehead. And as I exhaled, the pressure just went out through my amygdalas and my third eye, my frontal lobe. And I was in peace. That pressure was gone, that pain was gone. And then I just kept breathing, and I soon slid into bliss. And I was aware that I was still there, but I couldn't tell where my body was, but I knew I was still sitting up. So I continued to keep breathing, and then I kind of blipped out, as I call it, and I was in a multidimensional state. And I'm thinking, this is what I experienced in 93 when I was in the Great Pyramid in the sarcophagus. And from that time, I became a light body when I was in that trip twice. And my whole life, going back to 93, defined the rest of my life, because my whole life I've been looking for a way to show people how to experience that multidimensionality and that bliss that I experienced when I was at the Temple of Isis in Egypt and in the sarcophagus. And I experienced it when I was doing the spiral breath. And the spiral breath reconnected my brain, and it got all the lobes and the whole brain working at the same time, and it connected my heart to the brain. So now I not only had a way to heal myself, I had a way to share people to also increase their intuition, to lessen the pain and the discomfort in their body, to create, to heal their emotions, to move through their emotions. If I have something going on, I just sit down, I start doing the spiral breath, boom, it goes away really fast. And one of the things I'll do, and we'll, at the end of my presentation, we'll do the spiral breath. But I was guided to touch my heart when I started to breathe. So what's happened is during my breath work, when I touch my heart, my body knows I'm doing spiral breath, I'm moving into balance, I'm moving into bliss. And sometimes I can just touch my heart when I'm out of balance and out of sync, and boom, my body remembers, and instead of doing all of this, it goes this. And it puts me in the balance. So that's what I'm going to share with you. And so the spiral breath, and my little cool Bobby clicker isn't working. I brought everything except the batteries. So this is the spiral breath. This is the design that I saw. So at first was the breath. This is the limbic system here in the brain. And as I was doing my breath work, as I started to come into balance, I saw a Merkaba in emerald green start spinning and spiraling around my heart. And it was going in both directions. It was the toroidal field going in both directions, left to right, right to left, up and over and down. And after a while, then my heart, it came into sync. Then another Merkaba came up, and that star that came up, and it touched my limbic system. And then as the body and the breath work was going on and I was coming into more balance, then the big star and the big Merkaba came up, so that was like encasing my whole body. And then when I went into bliss, I saw the Merkaba and the star above, as when my 1,000-petal lotus opened and that gate, the 8th gate opened, I moved into that multidimensionality, and that's what that symbol was. So when I came to and settled down, I immediately drew what I had experienced, and this is it. And then I had somebody animate it for me. So breath work is really good, whether it's the spiral breath or another breath technique or just breathing. It's very important for us to do breath work because our life depends on breath. You can go without food for so many days, you can go with water for so many days, but you can only go without breath for a couple of minutes. So this is from The Secret of the Golden Flower, the Chinese Book of Life, and I like this saying, true breathing will appear, whereupon the substance of the mind will become perceptible. This is because when the mind is subtle, breath is subtle. When the mind is unified, it moves energy. And it does the same thing when you're working with your pendulum. So when the breath is subtle, mind is subtle. When energy is unified, it moves mind. That is what is called the preservation of pure energy. And if you find that you're having trouble with your pendulum, take a few moments to breathe and bring your energy into balance, raise your frequency, and raise your consciousness. You're putting yourself into harmony, and you'll start getting truer responses. So consciously disciplining your refined breathing, and I do my focus breath, the spiral breath. I do it every day. So I do it when I first wake up, as I set the course of my day, I set my intention, I put my essential oil on, and I'm doing my breath work, and I go through the scenario of what my day is going to be like, and I give thanks for me being open to receive all the bounty that's coming in, that I recognize it and I take the gifts that are coming. So I do that in the morning when I wake up. I also do it before I go to bed. And then my intention when I go to sleep is that any residue, negative residue that I have acquired throughout the day, that it be transmuted and into love, and all that I'm supposed to keep with me goes into the files, and it's where it needs to be for me to access it will in the future. So conscious breathing and disciplining yourself for true breath, and true breath is utilizing both nostrils. And when you breathe, you don't realize that you're breathing through one nostril or the other. You just take it for granted that you have two nostrils and they're both working. But you'll have one that's dominant, and for about an hour to an hour and a half, the left one will be dominant, and then the right one will be dominant. And then it'll switch back and forth. And then every once in a while, you'll be breathing with both nostrils. So when you're in focused, true breathing, you're breathing with both nostrils at the same time. And this stimulates the limbic system, the frontal lobes, and it increases your extrasensory perception. And when you're in focused breathing, you'll quiet the mind. If you have excessive thinking, if you have excessive worry, anxiety, if you're in fear, if you sit down and you do a few moments of focused breath work with a good intention, you're going to move through it and you're going to become more alert and more aware. One of the things I noticed when I started doing the spiral breath is that when I'm doing my breath work, I'm really hyper aware of what's going on around me. And I can take that with me when I'm going throughout my day. So you will start to hear things before they are in your realm really of hearing. I know when somebody's coming. I have actually gotten up and gone to the door just as they're pulling into the driveway to answer someone who was coming unexpected. Or I'll lean over and I'll say, "Oh, pick up the phone, Sherry's calling." And my mom will say, "How do you know she's calling?" The phone rings and it's my sister. So as you're doing the breath and you're activating your limbic system and your frontal lobe, you're increasing your higher consciousness and you're increasing your awareness. So you become aware of what's around you. I didn't realize there's someone there. So you become aware of what's around you, and not just the people but the things, and then you'll start noticing how much you're taking in and how little you were taking in before you started doing focused breath work and the spiral breath that kept you, before you did it, you're narrow-minded and you were just seeing what's here. And when you're doing the spiral breath and you open up your perception, your awareness goes out here. You can even be driving forward and you know what color car is coming up behind you before you can see it in your rearview mirror, because your peripheral goes that way. It expands, so it's really nice. So these are little things that you'll notice as you're doing the breath work, and it's little things that that let you know that you're doing it and you're doing it right. So with the left nostril, when the left nostril is dominant, your mind can wander. When the right nostril is dominant, you can be fidgety. So when I was trying to meditate, when I was first trying to physically meditate and I was taking meditation classes, I was so frustrated because I kept falling asleep while the person was talking. I just couldn't sit still. And this let me know how I was breathing. And when I started putting my intent and my focus, so my breath was coming from both nostrils, in and out, your mind stills and your mind comes together, and that's really when you start manifesting and manifesting your intentions. And when you put your joy behind it and your bliss and your happiness, then you really manifest it because you're focused on it with laser focus, and then you put a happy intention to it. So again, the left nostrils preside over mental actions and the right nostril over physical actions. So if you find that you're a little fidgety or you're getting a little bit tired, you can start breathing through your both nostrils, and you do that Darth Vader breath where you hear it, you feel it in the back of your breath, and it's audible. You do a couple of those and you're wide awake. I love this stuff. You don't have to take anything. So, breath, because there's the energy that is around us in the universe. It really has everything we need, the energy around us, and so breathe it in. So, while I was doing the spiral breath, I channel the Marys and Mary Magdalene and Divine Mother. And Mary Magdalene came to me and she said, "There where is the noose lies the treasure." And knowing the gospel according to Mary, from Mary Magdalene, when I got finished, I immediately looked that up and I reread it because she said reread my gospels. And what I realized, there where is the noose lies the treasure. And I'm writing a book on this with the spiral breath and putting these things together and sharing it. I get goosebumps because it's like my whole soul just synced it up. So when Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and she saw Jesus, she said, "Rabboni, how is it that I see you? Is it through my psyche, my soul, or is it through my spirit?" And Jesus said, "It is neither through the soul nor the spirit, but through the noose between the two which sees the vision." So when I heard that, I saw my spiral breath connecting the heart and the limbic system. And it's the thread, that thread of energy that connects the brain and the heart. We have for so long been void of the heart, and we're either too emotional, void of thought, or we're too anal and too mental, void of emotion. And we're in the time where we need to connect the two to bring the two together. And noose, I thought, was very curious, and I said, "That's a very curious word." And she said, "Well, you know, the powers that want to be in control, they reword things, and so it's why they hung the priests and the priestesses back during the Crusades, because they or beheaded them because they were trying to break the noose. They were trying to break the eternal connection from the heart and the mind, and it's energetic. They cannot do it. It's energetic. And that's where that came from, and they changed the wording to N-O-O-S-E. But noose means the finest point of the soul. There, where is the noose, lies the treasure. And in the spiral breath process and doing the breath work and doing my healing, I again reconnected to my God-like powers. And Jesus and Mary Magdalene and the ancient teachers, they tell us that we are an immaculate mirror of God. That was a name that God used for Mary Magdalene, that she was the immaculate mirror of God. She is, we are. And when Jesus says, "All these things I do, you can do and more," it's because we're an immaculate mirror of God. And when you do the spiral breath and you connect the heart to the mind and you're opening the limbic system and you open up that gate to the multi-dimensions, you can do anything you put your mind to. The only limit and the limitations are what you put on yourself. And you put those on when you get stuck in the third dimension. I know, I've been there. And when I had my head injury, does anybody familiar with Sophia, Pistis Sophia and Sophia Wisdom?
The Sophia Code?
Pardon?
The Sophia Code?
Well, there is a code, but there's a book from the ancient teachings, and they found it in Qumran in earthenware, and it was translated, but it's ancient text, and it talks about Sophia is before all Sophia wisdom, that she has always been and always will, and everything comes from Sophia. So it brings a balance to not just the masculine, but the feminine, because it's both masculine and feminine. But it's a nice book to read. It's a little heavy, so it's one of those that you read a couple paragraphs or a page, and then you have to sit with it. But it really has some nice nice information and nice wisdom, and it triggers that memory. But in the book, Sophia, who Mary Magdalene, it says in the book that Mary Magdalene was held that office. She was like the physical aspect at one time, and she was called Little Sophia, and she got heavy with matter. And when I had my head injury, I had anger, I had fear that I wasn't going to get back to the way I was before the injury. I had a lot of anger to the person that created the injury, as I was injured at the hands of someone I love. And then the guilt, why didn't I see this? And then the shame, and people say, wow, you're the epitome of, you're the one who stands up for abuse. How could you have let this happen? It's like, I was sleeping. So it was part of my lesson, and it brought a lot of emotion, and it brought up emotions that I had from my childhood and from my past. But they were all coming up, and they weren't. I also believe in divine accordance. If it was supposed to happen, it's going to. If it wasn't supposed to happen, it wouldn't. So even though I would rather have not been hit in the head, I was gifted the spiral breath. And I was taken back because I was riding pretty high, and I was manifesting. I was in a really sweet position in life, and then I was put down, and I had to bring myself up. So I was heavy with matter. I was heavy with emotion. I was heavy with pain. I was heavy with discomfort. I was heavy in fear. So the spiral breath, as I'm doing my processing and doing the spiral breath every day, those emotions started whipping through really fast. So I'd be breathing, and a thought would go by, and I'd go, wow, I haven't thought about that in years. And then pretty soon, my thought was, wow, I haven't, what was that? And the faster that the experiences passed, the faster it was leaving your energy, because everything you've experienced is energy, and it's stored in your cells. And as you're doing the spiral breath and you raise your frequency and you're clearing yourself out, you're allowing that which sometimes has been hidden from your consciousness to come up and with grace and with ease move out of your system. And the spiral breath and the breathing really helps you do that. So there used to be times where the healers would say, you have to face your fears, you have to move through it, to just do it. And it was too much for some people. I saw a woman break one time in an event because she was being pushed to remember. She wasn't remembering for a reason. It was too traumatic for her. And when she remembered, she fell apart. And I was so grateful that I was present, because I scooped her up in my arms and I started singing this song, making me cry. Lullabies from for the inner child, Shana Noel. How can anyone ever tell you? It's a little verse. How can anyone ever tell you you are anything less than wonderful? How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. And I sang this over and over and over until she quit crying. And that grace was what gave her the courage to heal, and she was able to move through. And it was a very powerful thing. So yes, it was her time to come through, because she also needed to know that she could go through that, and she could come through it with grace and ease. So if something comes up, it's coming up for a reason. I like to call those things same scene, different play. If the same scenario keeps coming around, one, it's grabbing your attention that you have to address it. And how you know how you are healing and how how far you've come, if you've let the issues go and the energy go, how would you know if you don't have the scene to come around again so you can see how you reacted this time to how you reacted that time? And the spiral breath allows you to come in and move that energy. So the ancient ones, they call becoming fully realized human beings, they call it anthropos. And you'll see that term in the Bible and some of the Gospels and the books that aren't in the Bible, but you'll see that term anthropos. It means fully realized human being, an immaculate mirror of God. So again, the nous is the energetic connection that connects the heart and the limbic system. And it connects the heart and the mind. And the nous is the core, it's centered in our heart. And when you hold the frequency of unconditional love, there is nothing that can stop you. No one who can get in your way, nothing you cannot accomplish when you move through it with unconditional love. Any intention or desire or manifestation you're trying to achieve, if you put unconditional love and joyful unconditional love, it manifests very quickly. And it's kind of a promise because, you know, God asks, and says, ask big. We heard that, Bill, you said that today. Expect, it's the expectations. And expect big, and expect your prayer to be answered. One time, someone asked me if I had a busy schedule, and I said, no, not yet. But I trust that God will fill my book. And he said, really? You really believe you're that arrogant that you can think that God will fill your scheduling? I said, no, it's not arrogance, it's faith. When I walked in on Monday morning, my book was empty, and in 2 hours I was booked 3.5 weeks out. So it's that expectation, and it's not arrogance, it's just you ask, and God says, ask and I'll deliver. So then you expect Him to deliver. And it's not out of arrogance, it's just out of faith. So the best dowsing tool we have is our heart and our mind. And Bill, you said earlier today that the dowsing increases your intuition, and your intuition increases your dowsing skills. So when you connect the heart and the mind together, you are really sinking in your dowsing skills, and you're heightening your dowsing skills because you get more accurate, you start believing in yourself, and pretty soon, and the dowsing tool, it is a tool. It is a tool to give you confirmation of what you already know. And when you use the tool and you start practicing, it's kind of that pomp and circumstance, and pretty soon you know the answer, and you know where it's going to go before the pendulum even swings. And then you smile like that because you know it works. So the best dowsing tool is your heart and your mind, and when you are in sync, you can shift energy. And you can pull out, when you walk into a room and you feel that negativity, you can pull out your pendulum and you can spin it around. And you can also walk into the room and you can just be nonchalant and you can spin up the energy, because energy is energy. The pendulum is just showing you and giving you an example, and you can see physically what it is that you're doing. It's a physical intention, but you can do that just by walking in. And dowsing is muscle testing. It's you can douse, you can hold something and fall backwards, fall forwards. So however you use your dowsing skills, doing the spiral breath allows you to get more accurate. So our heart is 5,000 times more magnetic than the brain. So when you center in your heart space, again, love. Have you ever just been having a really bad time and somebody just opens up and they give you a hug, or they even just give you a look, and you just know that they know, and they give you that boost of energy and your heart melts and then everything's good? Your pendulum and your dowsing skills will increase when you increase the frequency and the love that you have in your heart. And by doing the spiral breath and connecting the heart and the mind, It gives you a technique of how you can increase that. So, limbic system. I know I stopped in that sentence because my brain said, speed it up. So, this is the limbic system, in case you're not familiar with it. So, the thalamus, the pituitary, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, hippocampus, the mammillary body, the fornix, pineal gland, and the cingulate gyrus. And what's not on here is the olfactory bulbs. And the olfactory bulbs is when you inhale, and that's part of the limbic system too. That's why you can smell an essential oil, and if it's gratitude, you can move into gratitude. If it's forgiveness, automatically your body goes into forgiveness. But one of the things that I realized when I was doing the spiral breath is the amygdalas, and these are the amygdalas here, these points, you have two on both sides, and they rest on either side of your third eye. And it was during this time when I was doing the spiral breath, and as I exhaled, and the green, emerald green light became golden as it came through my amygdalas, I realized, you know those little cherubs that you see with the little horns on their forehead? It's their amygdalas. It's a symbol that's showing that they're enlightened. It has nothing to do with any devil. It's acknowledging that they're enlightened and they're multidimensional because their amygdalas are open. So when I was doing the spiral breath, all of a sudden I hear this click, click. There's like, and I stopped for a second, and when I work on people, I hear that all the time. If I am holding the base of their skull and their forehead, or even just putting my intention there, as far back as I can remember, just before they came into balance, I would hear. What I realized, because I was studying the glia brain and the limbic system when I had the injury, it forced, it didn't force me, but I delved into that with greater passion because I wanted to understand the scientific. So I'm very spiritual and woo-woo over here, and then I'm very scientific and heavy over here. And sometimes I'm graced to bring it in the middle so people can understand, the heaviness, and the woo-woo, I can bring it in a little more technical terms. But the amygdalas, the spiral breath allowed my body to move from the posterior amygdala to the frontier, or the anterior amygdala. So, like this is the amygdala. The posterior part of the amygdala, this is where your fear, your anger, your guilt, anxiety, shame, worry, busyness, bipolar people, depressed people, they're locked in the back, that posterior part of their amygdalas. The front part is the bliss. So when you're doing the spiral breath, or you're doing any breath work, or it could be meditation or intention, but for me it was the spiral breath, my energy and my amygdalas, where I was locked in my the posterior amygdala, I moved forward into the frontal amygdala, which activated the frontal lobe. And when that happened, I heard, because there's two. So now I had a physical understanding and a scientific understanding of what was happening in my body physically and spiritually. And immediately that heaviness disappeared. So if you're locked in your posterior amygdala and nothing you have tried has gotten you over the hump and out of the muckety-muck, it alleviates the guilt and the shame of not being able to do something, because it's a biophysical thing and it's a spiritual thing and it's an energy thing. So when you start doing the spiral breath and you do intention, it moves you forward into the frontal lobes of your amygdalas, and it awakens your frontal lobe. And you can't help but move into a state of bliss and compassion and forgiveness. And it's a very sweet thing, and it happens very gently, and it's just, wow, it's just a very nice thing. So frontal lobe, for those who don't know, your frontal lobe is the largest part of your brain, but if you put your palm over your forehead, everything under your palm is your frontal lobe. And defines your amygdalas. T.D. Lingo did this. He had people put their thumbs in their ear and rest their middle fingers lightly on their forehead. And that's where your amygdalas are. And I'm going to change fingers so I'm not doing something perfect. So, you had a question, or it's just aha? So, so when you're doing the spiral breath, and for me, I started to feel little vibration, little whirly, little humming in my third eye and then the amygdalas. And I could actually hear the hum and the whirl in my mind, in my brain, as the amygdalas were starting to move forward. And as they did the little click, click, and I moved forward, my whole frontal lobe was vibrating. So when you're doing the breath work, it's another little sign to look for. Some people feel it in their stomach, some people feel it in their heart, some people feel it in their head. One fella who came into one of my workshops, he was so funny. He came because his wife made him. So, he was sitting there, so he started doing the breath, and then his arms uncrossed, and he's doing the breath, and then his legs uncrossed, he's doing the breath. And then I'm looking at him, he was very tan. And right over his third eye, this diamond started to raise on his forehead, his skin raised on his forehead, and he had this white diamond right there. And when he stopped breathing, and we finished the exercise, and he said, "Oh, we have to breathe for 20 minutes? I said, okay, we'll just do 10. So 40 minutes later, I had to bring everybody out of it because they were so in bliss, and he was like, this stuff really works. And I had him turn around and look in the mirror, and he was amazed, because for him, God gifted him a sign. Besides him feeling it, because he could discount that later on, but his eyes saw the sign. So it does activate the third eye, and it does activate the frontal lobes when you're doing a spiral breath. So bringing in sacred geometry with this, the vesica piscis, or the vesica piscis, it's like tomato, tomato. When I'm speaking, if I say piscis, someone corrects me. If I say Pisces, somebody corrects me. So piscis is the English version over abroad, and Pisces is become the kind of adulterated version of the United States. So when you look at the vesica piscis, the two circles, the left brain, the right brain, and in the center is the limbic system. I always liked the symbol, and as I got older, and after the injury, and putting all of the sacred geometry together, I'm like a little scientist. I'm just putting all these pieces together, and I have written a book, and it'll be out shortly, and I connect all those little dots from energy to sacred geometry and color and sound and frequency. So again, just showing you, this is the amygdala, this is kind of what it looks like, and the hippocampus. Okay, so when you activate your amygdalas, you are going to shift into a state of harmony, joy, and bliss. And like I said earlier, sometimes you will hear the clicking sound when you're moving into the anterior amygdalas. Some people feel like they're flying. Some people have gotten their T.D. Lingo had, back in the 70s, he had people visualize tickling their amygdalas with a feather. So that's the feather technique is something that is very, very popular. And again, it vibrates and it hums. By activating the amygdala, And activating the higher brain functions, you can increase your precognition, clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy, telekinesis, increased accuracy with your dowsing, and other esoteric abilities. Moving multidimensional will be one of the things you will experience. Moving into, when I was in the King's Chamber, I laid in the sarcophagus and I was doing, breath work, and I had been doing 14 days of ceremonies, and I became my light body, but I also went multidimensional, and I went into the realm of imperishable stars, where the stars were beings and souls that were not in form, and then there were beings that were not light and in form, and not in form. And it was so blissful and euphoric. They're just like so minuscule of a word. There really isn't any word to experience when you move into that realm. It's just, you have to experience it, but you can, because I'm here to tell you, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Yes.
We didn't have childhoods like yours. Come on.
But you know what? If you knew my childhood, you would cry. I had someone say, I didn't have a peaches and cream life like you did. I said, let me tell you about my life. And then I sat her down and I talked. I didn't stop talking for 40 minutes. And she wept because she didn't have a fraction of the horror that I had as a child.
And that's what created your gifts in part.
The gifts, in part, because that's having the insight. I was blessed to have my grandparents that had that wisdom and knowledge, and they kept me open. So when I went to school, everybody, all kids, they learn at the speed of light. They're wide open, they're in theta, they're wide open, and then they go into kindergarten and first grade, and they get slowed down. See, Dick, run. So how many people, how many children have you known? I have a friend, he worked for 4.5 hours to get the carburetor out of the car and put back in, and he sat down, and 10 minutes later, his 4-year-old comes over and he hands him the carburetor and he goes, hey Daddy, I fixed it for you. This 4-year-old watching his dad, because kids learn at the speed of light, he took it out, brought it to him, and then he even went back and put it back in for him, and it ran. More. So it's because kids are in theta, and when you're doing the spiral breath and you're doing meditation, you go into that realm, into that alpha and that theta realm. So that can be a whole nother conversation. So we're just gonna stick with this. So part of the limbic system is the pineal, and you hear a lot about the pineal in art, and at the Vatican there's that huge bronze statue, and in my research I found out that that huge bronze statue, which is the largest in the world, was removed from the Temple of Isis and put in Temple of Isis, I think so, Temple of Isis, and put in the Vatican because it represents the pineal. And the Pope has it on the staff. There's symbolage all through all the cultures, activating and remembering the pineal. And the pineal, it converts serotonin into melatonin. And just a little tidbit, then melatonin is the precursor to DMT, which is the natural, our body naturally makes DMT. It's a psychedelic, it's the part that moves you multidimensional, and your pineal produces this, and it was chemically produced, and that's what's LSD. But natural DMT, when you are doing the spiral breath and you are activating your amygdalas and activating your limbic system, you actually start producing that, and your pineal starts putting that out, and that's what helps move you into those higher realms. The first time your DMT is excreted is in 9 weeks. It's when the fetus's pineal puts out DMT, life force, vital life force comes into the body. And that's the first time you feel heartbeat. And the last time you excrete DMT is just before you pass. And it's that surge or the rally that people have just before they pass and they get strong. And it's the body allowing the soul free passage and easier passage up into the multidimensional realms. So you can access that through activating your limbic system and your pineal through the spiral breath and other modalities. And it is, they call it the stargate within our physical body, and it really, truly is that access. In the pineal, there's piezoelectric calcite crystals, and they're transmitters and receivers, and that's what makes them, the pineal, so powerful. So quickly, as a transmitter, the clusters, they generate, resonate, and transmit electromagnetic energy. So whatever your intention is, again, when you put that heart energy to it, you can broadcast your energy, and it's why your thought process and your healing energy, and you work on someone that's in a couple states over, they'll feel it instantaneously. It comes from the pineal and the piezoelectric crystals. And also as a receiver, because they also receive light. And those crystals, they're in quartz crystals, and they're in our DNA. So I'm going to move a little bit faster. So when you are in sync, and some say it's when the kundalini comes up, when you are, your chakras are aligned, and your emotions and your body is at a higher frequency and free of the lower emotional issues. When the kundalini comes up and the pineal and the pituitary are accessed and activated, there is a 1,000-petal lotus. Has anybody heard of that 1,000-petal lotus? So it's in the top of the brain, and if you were to take the top part off of the brain and look, you see these folds of brain material. And when the pineal and the pituitary are active and all your chakras are in line, it starts to vibrate. And then it opens. And when it opens, you feel this whirl. Some people feel cool breeze, but you feel a whirl. And that opens you right up, and you move right through into the multidimensional realm. So there's 1,000 nerves at the crown chakra up there, and all those nerve endings and those petals, they will vibrate, and it's a really phenomenal experience. Again, you'll know it when you feel it, and once you do, you're going to want to do it again. And it resembles, when it's closed, it resembles the closed bud of a lotus, and when it's open, you see the full open lotus. So you see, like in the different cultures, that the masters are sitting on a lotus flower. It's letting you know that they were open. Alrighty, so I'm going to kind of go through here. So Glia brain, we're going to just skip through. You want me to skip through it, or you want me to tap on it? How you guys doing? Touch on it?
Yeah, go ahead. We can go back and watch the video.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that'll be very helpful.
So, the glia brain. So we have two brains in our head. We have the neural brain and the glia brain. The neural brain is the gray matter, and that's the covering on the outside. It deals with consciousness in the physical realm. And the white matter, the glia brain, that's the inside. And it initiates your spiritual realm and the emotional field. And Einstein, with him being so brilliant, when they took a section of Einstein's brain, they found that everything was the same. There was nothing really different in the size or the shape of his brain, except in his frontal lobes, he had an excessive amount of glia cells. And glia cells encapsulate the brain and the organs, and they wrap all the nerve endings, and they're in the body from the head to the toe. And this is the myelin sheath. So it's a neuroinsulator in the body parts, and these are what some of them look like. They look like little octopus, and there's a video you can find on YouTube, on the internet. You can look for and the astrocytes and the glia cells that are in motion, and you see these long tendrils that are just kind of going out, and they look for the axons and the nerve endings, and then you see them reaching for it, and then they wrap around it, and they cover it in myelin sheath. So that protective insulation is what the energy and electricity and vibration and frequency runs through when in your body. So you can put garlic on the bottom, a slice of garlic on the bottom of your foot, or you can put an essential oil on the bottom of your foot, and in 3 seconds you can taste it in your mouth. It's going through the myelin sheath, which is made up of glia cells. And there's several different types of glia cells. I won't go into that. But in the nervous system, the glia cells outnumber neurons 6 to 1. In the white matter of the brain, it's 100 to 1. And this is a glia cell. And you see these little tendrils looking around, and they connect. And this is what is in your brain and in your memory. So when you have a thought, and you revisit that thought, these little tendrils, they come out and they go, okay, I'm going to connect here, and we're going to fortify that thought. And oh, we're going to come over here, we're going to fortify that thought. And pretty soon, your thoughts are running in autopilot. If it's a thought that is negative, or that's creating harm, or keeping you locked in survival, every time you revisit that thought, you fortify the neural net and in the brain, and this is another reason why you can't move through things, because it's a biochemical, biophysical thing, and it's not just in your willpower. But the same thing happens if you have a positive thought. When you have a positive thought, and every time you revisit that positive thought, you start strengthening that neural net, and you create more glia cells that are empowering the structure of that thought. Then there's no energy going to the negative thoughts, then the connections just start to break away because they're not being utilized. This is how you change your mind. This is how you change your life. Dr. Joe Dispenza has a nice book,
Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you
Say
very
it
much.
again. Did you say it?
Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. Very nice book, and it really goes into that, and also evolve the brain. Very nice thing, nice books to read, and it really, really makes you understand why you do the things you do. Back from programming yourself with what you see from the age of 7, everything up to 7 years is a program that your body is using unconsciously through your adult life. And depending on what your childhood is, will be what you unconsciously create. So when you understand that you have a way, you have a choice, and you have tools that will shift the way you've been to the way you want to be, and you can do it by breathing, it's really sweet. So the books help, spiral breath helps. And now, who wants to do the spiral breath? Okay, so I'm gonna, or do we have any questions before I go into that? Because I've got you mental and alerts. So are there any questions on anything that I asked or I talked about?
You touched on Sophia, and there's a book called
Pistis.
Sophia Code.
Pistis Sophia. It's
What is it?
T-I-S, Pistis Sophia. It's a really nice book. Talks about her fall and then how she remembered, she called for help, and Jesus came and held the light for her until she remembered. And that, I believe, is where they got the story of Jesus cast the devil, whatever, out. I believe she was heavy with matter, and he came and she called for help because she was heavy and she was forgetting how to hold the light. And he came and held the light until she remembered. That's Pistis Sophia. So it's a really, really nice book. It's a big, thick book, and it'll take you a while to read it. But so if we have no more questions, then I'm just going to ask everybody to get comfortable.